Peace is a strange thing, Daniel Carter once heard an old commander say, because sometimes it asks the wrong man to carry it. The war had lasted 11 years, 4 months, and 12 days by Earth's official count, long enough for entire cities to grow up beneath the quiet hum of orbital defense grids, long enough for children to learn the shapes of alien ships before they learned the names of constellations, and now it was ending in the most unlikely way imaginable. The alien fleet hung above Earth like a second sky, thousands of silent vessels reflecting the pale blue glow of the planet below, their polished hulls catching sunlight that traveled 93 million miles from the sun only to spill across cold metal that had crossed entire star systems. Inside the command chamber of the United Earth Coalition headquarters in Colorado Springs, a room carved deep beneath layers of reinforced granite and steel, Daniel Carter stood at attention with his hands loosely clasped behind his back while a dozen political leaders stared at him like men studying a strange piece of equipment they weren't quite sure how to operate. Daniel was 34 years old, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered from years of flight training and emergency drills conducted in cramped cockpits that smelled faintly of recycled air and machine oil. His hair was light brown, cut short the way pilots preferred it, and the faint scar above his right eyebrow came from a training accident that happened during his first year in the Coalition Air Corps. None of those details seemed particularly important to the men around the table. What mattered was something simpler. "Captain Carter," the Secretary-General finally said, sliding a tablet across the polished steel surface, "the Aurelian Empire has delivered their final condition for peace." Daniel glanced at the screen. A single line of translated alien script blinked softly beneath the room's white lights. "Human representative must enter royal union with Princess Lyra Valeth." Daniel blinked once. Outside the mountain facility, wind moved quietly across the Colorado plains, brushing through dry grass and solar arrays that stretched for miles. Somewhere above that wind, high beyond the thin blue atmosphere, the alien armada waited. "You're asking me to marry her," Daniel said calmly. No one in the room laughed. The Secretary-General leaned forward slightly, fingers interlaced. "We're asking you to stop a war." For a long moment Daniel said nothing. His mind drifted briefly to the cockpit of the Falcon-class interceptor he had flown for most of his career, the familiar vibration of engines humming through the seat, the digital stars cape glowing across the canopy during long patrol missions in Earth's outer orbit. Pilots liked problems with clear solutions: stabilize altitude, conserve fuel, return to base. This was different. Across the table, one of the diplomats cleared his throat. "Princess Lyra Valeth is heir to the Aurelian throne," he explained. "Their culture treats marriage as a binding political covenant. If she forms a union with a human, their empire will recognize Earth as a permanent ally instead of a rival." Daniel studied the translation again. Somewhere beyond the clouds, there was a princess who had never met him, never heard his name, and yet the fate of 2 civilizations now seemed quietly balanced on a decision he hadn't expected to make when he woke up that morning. "Does she know about this?" Daniel asked. "Yes," the Secretary-General said. "And?" A brief pause settled over the room like dust drifting through sunlight. Her response, the Secretary-General replied carefully, was that the human would simply be the price of peace. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. He imagined the alien fleet again, thousands of silent ships waiting above the curve of the Earth, engines powerful enough to cross galaxies yet perfectly still now, like predators deciding whether a hunt was worth the effort. Finally he nodded once. "If it ends the war," he said quietly, "I'll do it." Somewhere in orbit, hidden inside a vessel made from silver alloy older than human civilization, Princess Lyra Valeth received the same message. She read the human's name once. Daniel Carter. Then she closed the transmission and spoke softly to the silent chamber around her. "He is not my husband," she said to no one in particular. "He is a treaty." The shuttle that carried Daniel Carter left Earth at sunrise, though sunrise looked different when seen from the edge of space. Through the small reinforced window beside his seat, the planet slowly rotated beneath him, blue oceans glowing softly under streaks of white clouds while the thin silver curve of the atmosphere shimmered like fragile glass. He had flown military interceptors for most of his adult life, but riding inside a diplomatic shuttle felt different from flying a fighter jet. In a fighter, every switch had purpose and every second demanded attention. In this shuttle there was nothing to do except sit still and think, which Daniel had always suspected was the more dangerous assignment. The cabin was quiet except for the steady hum of the fusion engines pushing the vessel upward through the darkness. A digital clock on the wall displayed the distance to the Aurelian flagship in miles, and the number steadily counted down as the enormous alien vessel slowly grew larger in the window. At first it looked like a faint star against the black sky. Then it became a shape. Then a structure so large that Daniel had to lean closer to the glass to take it all in. The ship stretched nearly 2 miles from bow to stern, its curved silver hull reflecting sunlight in long ribbons of pale gold. Smaller escort ships drifted around it like careful birds circling a mountain. Daniel exhaled slowly. Even after years of orbital patrols, the scale of alien engineering still felt unreal. Across the aisle, an Earth diplomat adjusted his suit jacket and glanced nervously toward the window. According to their schedule, the man said quietly, "Princess Lyra Valeth will receive you within the hour after docking." Daniel nodded once. "That sounds efficient." The diplomat gave a short laugh that carried no humor. "Their entire civilization is efficient." The shuttle continued forward until the flagship filled the window completely. Panels along the alien hull shifted open with mechanical grace, revealing a docking bay large enough to hold several commercial airliners. Blue landing lights illuminated the metallic interior while guiding signals pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. When the shuttle finally settled onto the platform with a soft vibration beneath the floor, Daniel felt the engines power down and the silence that followed seemed deeper than the vacuum outside. A moment later the rear hatch opened with a gentle hiss of equalizing air pressure. Cool air flowed into the cabin, carrying a faint scent of polished metal and something unfamiliar, almost like rain on stone. Daniel stood, adjusted the collar of his formal coalition uniform, and stepped toward the open ramp. The docking bay stretched nearly 300 feet across, its floor formed from smooth silver panels that reflected the light from overhead crystal fixtures embedded in the ceiling. Several alien guards waited near the base of the ramp. They were tall, easily 7 feet in height, their armor shaped from dark blue alloy that curved smoothly around their shoulders and torsos. Their skin held the same faint blue tone described in every intelligence briefing Earth had ever collected about the Aurelian species. None of them moved as Daniel descended the ramp. Their golden eyes simply followed him with calm attention. One of them stepped forward and inclined his head slightly. "Daniel Carter of Earth," the guard said in careful English, his voice steady and measured. "You will come with us. The princess is waiting." Daniel glanced once more through the open bay toward the distant curve of Earth glowing softly through the blackness beyond the docking shield. Then he followed the guards across the shining floor toward a corridor that led deeper into the enormous ship. The hallway beyond the docking chamber stretched nearly 100 feet ahead, its walls lined with translucent panels that glowed faintly with pale blue light. Each step echoed quietly in the wide corridor. Daniel noticed small details the way pilots always did when entering unfamiliar territory. The temperature felt slightly cooler than a typical Earth building. The air carried a steady mechanical rhythm from distant engines somewhere deep within the vessel. Everything about the ship felt precise and deliberate, as if every panel and light had been placed with mathematical care. Finally the guards stopped before a set of towering doors nearly 20 feet tall. Symbols formed from elegant alien script shimmered across their surface. One of the guards pressed his hand against a small control panel and the doors parted silently down the center. Inside the chamber beyond stood a single figure near a wide observation window that looked out across the endless starfield. She was taller than Daniel expected, her posture straight and composed as moonlight from distant stars washed softly across her blue skin. Long silver hair fell across the back of a ceremonial robe woven from threads that shimmered faintly with every movement. She did not turn immediately when Daniel entered the room. Instead she kept her gaze fixed on the stars for several quiet seconds. When she finally faced him, her golden eyes studied him with calm precision, as if she were examining an unfamiliar instrument. "So, Princess Lyra Valeth said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that filled the chamber without effort. "This is the human chosen to become my husband." Daniel Carter met her gaze without lowering his eyes. For a brief moment the chamber remained perfectly still, as if even the quiet machinery humming through the enormous vessel had decided to pause and observe the meeting. The observation window behind the princess stretched nearly 30 feet across, revealing the silent ocean of space where distant stars shimmered like scattered grains of silver. Daniel had expected something intimidating. He had read every intelligence file Earth possessed about the Aurelian royal family during the flight up from the planet. None of those reports had mentioned how calm she looked. Princess Lyra Valeth studied him the way a scientist might examine a newly discovered element. Her golden eyes moved slowly from the collar of his coalition uniform to the small pilot wings pinned above his chest. Daniel noticed the subtle glow along the seams of her robe where thin threads of unknown metal caught the starlight and reflected it in faint ripples across the polished floor. She finally stepped forward. Even the movement seemed measured and deliberate, like gravity itself had agreed to cooperate with her. "You are smaller than I expected," she said quietly. Her voice carried a musical tone that echoed softly in the wide chamber. Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. "Most people say that about pilots," he replied. One of the guards standing near the entrance shifted slightly, but the princess raised a single hand and the guard immediately became still again. She stopped a few feet away from Daniel, close enough that he could see the subtle patterns across her blue skin, faint lines almost like frost on glass that shimmered whenever she moved beneath the chamber lights. "You understand the terms of this arrangement," Lyra said. "Our union ends the conflict between our civilizations." Daniel nodded. That was explained very clearly. She watched his expression for several seconds, as if searching for hesitation. "You do not seem afraid." Daniel glanced briefly toward the observation window where Earth appeared as a distant blue sphere suspended against the darkness. From this distance it looked peaceful, almost fragile. "I have flown patrol above that planet for years," he said calmly. "Fear does not help much up there." Lyra followed his gaze to the glowing world beyond the glass. "Your species protects it fiercely." Daniel shrugged slightly. "It is home." The princess considered that word carefully, repeating it under her breath as if testing how it felt. "Home." She turned back to him. "You should understand something, Daniel Carter of Earth. In my culture marriage is not a symbol. It is a contract of loyalty. You will remain within this vessel and later within my court. You will represent your species whether you wish to or not." Daniel nodded once. That sounds like a lot of responsibility for someone who was supposed to be the price of peace. For the first time a flicker of curiosity crossed her face. "You know that phrase. Your message reached Earth before I arrived," Daniel said. "Hard not to hear about it." The chamber fell quiet again. Somewhere deep within the ship a low vibration pulsed through the walls, the steady rhythm of engines capable of crossing entire galaxies without pause. Lyra studied him again, longer this time. Most humans she had encountered during negotiations avoided direct eye contact with her species. Daniel Carter did not. There was no arrogance in his posture. Only a strange calm she could not immediately explain. "You are not what I expected," she said softly. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "That seems to be happening a lot today." The princess turned toward the stars once more, folding her hands behind her back. "The ceremony will take place in 3 days according to Earth time," she said. "Until then you will remain aboard this vessel as my guest." Daniel glanced at the enormous chamber around him, the quiet guards, the endless corridors beyond the doors. "Guest," he repeated thoughtfully. Lyra looked back at him. "Do you disagree with the description?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. I just did not realize guests usually arrive as peace treaties." For a brief second something almost resembling amusement touched the corner of the princess's expression before disappearing again. She gestured toward the doors leading deeper into the ship. "Come, Daniel Carter. There is much about this place you must learn if you are to survive life in an Aurelian palace." And with that she began walking toward the corridor, not even checking if he followed, already certain that he would. The corridor beyond the observation chamber stretched deep into the heart of the Aurelian vessel, its floor formed from smooth metallic panels that reflected the faint blue glow of the walls like calm water. Reflecting moonlight. Daniel Carter walked a few steps behind Princess Lyra Valeth, noticing how quietly she moved despite her height. The long folds of her ceremonial robe drifted gently behind her with each step, catching the soft light from the wall panels and scattering it across the polished floor. The guards who had escorted Daniel earlier followed at a respectful distance, their presence steady but unobtrusive. The ship itself felt alive in a quiet mechanical way. A low vibration moved through the walls every few seconds, the distant rhythm of engines designed to cross interstellar distances without rest. Daniel had flown military craft for years, yet even he felt a strange sense of scale walking inside a vessel this enormous. After nearly a minute of silent walking, Lyra spoke without turning around. "You are studying everything," she said. Daniel glanced at the ceiling where narrow bands of glowing crystal ran the length of the corridor like lines of frozen lightning. "Pilot habit," he replied. "We learn to notice details before they become problems." Lyra slowed slightly, allowing him to walk beside her rather than behind. "What details have you noticed so far, Daniel Carter of Earth?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "Your ship maintains a temperature around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, he said calmly. "Cooler than most Earth buildings. The air pressure is slightly higher than standard sea level conditions. And your lighting system shifts brightness every 20 seconds to mimic a planetary day cycle." Lyra stopped walking. She turned toward him slowly, golden eyes narrowing with quiet interest. "That is a surprising amount of observation for someone who has been aboard less than 10 minutes. Daniel shrugged lightly. "Flying teaches you to pay attention." For a moment she simply studied him again. The faint glow from the wall panels traced soft patterns across her blue skin, highlighting the delicate frost-like markings that shimmered whenever she moved. Finally she continued walking. "Your quarters are ahead," she said. The corridor widened into a circular chamber nearly 40 feet across. Several doorways curved along the walls, each sealed by a smooth metallic panel etched with alien script. Lyra approached one of the doors and placed her hand against a small crystalline interface. The panel slid open with a quiet mechanical sigh. The room beyond was far larger than Daniel expected. A wide window curved along one wall, revealing the distant starfield. Beyond the ship's protective shield. The interior lighting glowed softly, illuminating a simple arrangement of furniture built from the same silver alloy used throughout the vessel. A bed platform stood near the window, its surface layered with smooth fabric that shimmered faintly when the air moved. A long desk faced the stars, and several unfamiliar instruments rested neatly along its surface. Daniel stepped inside and glanced around slowly. The room measured nearly 20 feet across, easily twice the size of the sleeping quarters he had grown used to inside military spacecraft. "This is for me," he said. Lyra remained in the doorway, watching his reaction with calm patience. "You will stay here until the ceremony," she said. "The ship will remain in orbit around your world during that time." Daniel walked closer to the window and looked out at the distant blue curve of Earth glowing softly against the darkness. From this distance the planet appeared peaceful, its oceans reflecting sunlight in gentle silver arcs. It was strange to think that entire governments had argued and negotiated for months so that one man could stand in this room and look back at his home from the ship of an alien princess. After a few seconds he spoke quietly. "You called me a guest earlier." Lyra inclined her head slightly. "Yes." Daniel turned toward her. "Guests usually get the option to leave." The princess held his gaze without hesitation. "You misunderstand the nature of this arrangement," she said calmly. You are free to walk anywhere within this vessel. You may speak to my advisors, observe our technology, and learn our customs. She paused briefly before continuing. But you will not leave. Daniel folded his arms loosely across his chest, considering the statement without visible frustration. Because the treaty depends on it. Lyra nodded once. Because peace depends on it. Silence settled between them again. The quiet hum of the massive engines pulsed softly through the walls like a distant heartbeat. After a moment Daniel looked back toward the stars outside the window. I suppose there are worse places to be stuck, he said. For the first time since they met, Princess Lyra Valeth allowed the smallest hint of a smile to appear. You will find, she said softly, that life inside an Aurelian palace is rarely boring. Then she turned and stepped back into the corridor, leaving Daniel alone in the quiet room while the stars slowly drifted across the wide window behind him. The first morning aboard the Aurelian vessel began without sunlight. Daniel Carter woke slowly to a soft shift in the lighting of his quarters as the wall panels brightened from a faint blue glow to a warmer white tone designed to imitate dawn. For a moment he lay still on the smooth platform that served as his bed, staring at the wide observation window where the stars had drifted several degrees across the darkness since the previous night. Earth still hung in the distance, a glowing blue sphere framed by thin ribbons of cloud that stretched across the oceans like brushstrokes of white paint. From this height the planet looked peaceful and impossibly quiet, nothing like the world that had spent more than a decade preparing for war with the empire that now surrounded it. Daniel sat up slowly and swung his feet onto the polished floor. The room felt cool, the temperature steady and precise in a way that reminded him of controlled environments inside research laboratories back on Earth. Somewhere beyond the walls of the chamber he could hear the low mechanical pulse of the ship's massive engines, a sound so deep and steady that it felt less like noise and more like a distant heartbeat echoing through metal corridors that stretched for miles. He walked toward the desk near the window where several unfamiliar instruments had been arranged neatly the night before. Each device appeared carefully designed, smooth metallic surfaces interrupted only by thin lines of glowing crystal that pulsed with faint light whenever he moved close. One panel shifted slightly as he approached, displaying a simple translation across its surface in clear English characters. Good morning, Daniel Carter. Daniel raised one eyebrow and leaned closer to the display. Good morning to you too, he said quietly. The panel responded immediately. Princess Lyra Valeth requests your presence for the midday meal. Daniel glanced at the small digital clock embedded into the wall beside the window. The ship had automatically synchronized its time system with Earth standard hours, and according to the display it was just after 9 in the morning back home. He exhaled slowly. Midday meal with an alien princess, he murmured to himself. That is a new one. The door to his quarters slid open a few minutes later with a soft, mechanical whisper. One of the tall Aurelian guards waited outside the room, his dark blue armor reflecting the pale corridor lights like polished stone. The guard inclined his head slightly. Daniel Carter of Earth, he said in the same calm voice Daniel had heard the previous day. The princess awaits you. Daniel stepped into the corridor and followed the guard through a series of wide hallways that curved gently through the enormous ship. The vessel felt different during this artificial morning cycle. The lighting panels glowed brighter, and several Aurelian attendants moved quietly along the corridors carrying small metallic containers or adjusting glowing interfaces built into the walls. None of them spoke to Daniel directly, but many paused briefly as he passed, their golden eyes studying him with quiet curiosity before returning to their work. After several minutes the guard stopped before another tall doorway. The doors opened silently, revealing a long chamber lined with smooth silver columns that reached nearly 30 feet to the ceiling. At the far end of the room stood a wide circular table made from dark polished crystal. Princess Lyra Valeth sat alone beside it, her silver hair falling across one shoulder while she examined a glowing data screen suspended in the air above the table. She looked up as Daniel approached, her expression composed but thoughtful. You adjusted to our environment quickly, she said. Daniel glanced around the chamber where soft white lights shimmered across the polished surfaces. Pilots learn to sleep anywhere, he replied. Lyra dismissed the floating screen with a simple motion of her hand and gestured toward the seat across from her. Then sit, she said. There are things about your species I would like to understand before we stand before two civilizations and call ourselves united. Daniel pulled out the chair and sat down slowly, resting his hands on the cool surface of the crystal table while the stars beyond the tall windows drifted silently across the endless black sky. Daniel Carter rested his hands lightly on the surface of the dark crystal table while Princess Lyra Valeth studied him with the same careful attention she had shown since the moment they met. The chamber around them felt vast and quiet, the tall silver columns reflecting soft light across the polished floor while distant stars drifted slowly past the high observation windows. A faint mechanical rhythm moved through the structure of the ship, steady and deep, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. Lyra gestured slightly toward the center of the table. A circular section of the crystal surface illuminated and several small metallic containers rose smoothly from hidden compartments beneath it. Each container opened with a gentle motion, revealing carefully arranged portions of food unfamiliar to Daniel's eyes. Some items glowed faintly with natural bioluminescence while others resembled thin slices of crystal layered across a shallow dish. Lyra watched his reaction. This meal has been prepared to match the biological requirements listed in the information your governments provided, she said calmly. Daniel leaned forward slightly, examining the nearest dish. You mean the file that said humans usually eat things like bread and grilled chicken? Lyra tilted her head with mild curiosity. Yes. Daniel allowed a small smile to appear. Then I appreciate the effort. He picked up one of the utensils resting beside the dish. The instrument appeared designed for a three-fingered hand rather than a human one, but it still functioned well enough. He sampled a small portion and paused for a moment, considering the unfamiliar flavor. It was surprisingly mild, with a texture somewhere between fruit and freshly baked bread. Not bad, he said after a second. Lyra watched him carefully. Your species adapts easily. Daniel shrugged slightly. Pilots learn not to be picky about food. For several moments they ate in silence. The quiet atmosphere of the chamber felt almost peaceful, far removed from the tension that had surrounded the negotiations between their civilizations for more than a decade. Finally Lyra placed her utensil down and folded her hands neatly in front of her. Tell me something, Daniel Carter, she said. Daniel glanced up. Sure. Lyra's golden eyes studied him with thoughtful precision. Why did you agree so quickly? Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, resting one arm along the edge of the table while he considered the question. You mean the marriage? Yes. He looked toward the tall window where Earth hung quietly against the darkness, its oceans glowing softly beneath distant sunlight. Where I come from, he said slowly, people grow up hearing stories about sacrifice. Lyra listened without interrupting. Daniel continued. Sometimes those stories are about soldiers who stay behind so others can leave. Sometimes they are about firefighters who walk into buildings everyone else is running away from. He glanced back at her. Most of the time the people in those stories are just regular men and women who happen to be standing in the right place when something difficult needs to be done. Lyra absorbed the explanation in silence. The faint glow from the chamber lights reflected across her silver hair as she considered his words. So you believe this is your duty? Daniel shook his head gently. Not exactly. Lyra raised one eyebrow slightly. Then what? Daniel looked down at the table for a moment before answering. It just seemed like the decent thing to do. The simplicity of the answer seemed to surprise her. In Aurelian culture decisions of such scale were normally explained through long discussions of strategy, honor, or political necessity. Yet this human spoke about it as if he had volunteered to help a neighbor repair a broken fence. Lyra studied him carefully. You realize that once the ceremony is complete you will remain within my world permanently. Daniel nodded. I figured that part out. You will not return to Earth. Daniel's gaze drifted once more toward the distant blue planet beyond the glass. I know. Lyra watched his expression for several seconds, searching for hesitation or regret. She found neither. Finally she spoke again, her voice softer than before. Your species is unusual. Daniel smiled faintly. That is one way to describe us. The chamber fell quiet once more as the enormous ship continued its silent orbit around the world below, carrying two individuals whose choices had quietly begun to reshape the future of entire civilizations. The next 2 days aboard the Aurelian vessel passed with a strange and quiet rhythm that Daniel Carter had never experienced before. The ship continued its silent orbit nearly 200 miles above the surface of Earth, its enormous structure gliding through the darkness like a silver continent drifting across an endless ocean of stars. From the wide observation decks scattered throughout the vessel, Daniel could sometimes see the faint glow of city lights across the night side of the planet, tiny clusters of gold and white spread across continents that looked peaceful from this distance. It was a strange feeling to watch the world continue turning while he stood inside the ship of an alien princess preparing to marry him for the sake of peace. That afternoon Daniel found himself walking through one of the long outer corridors that curved along the hull of the vessel. The hallway stretched nearly 100 feet in either direction, lined with tall windows that revealed the black silence of space beyond the protective energy barrier surrounding the ship. The lighting panels above him glowed with a warm white tone meant to imitate daylight on a planet's surface, and the polished metal floor reflected faint shapes of passing attendants moving quietly along the corridor. Daniel paused near one of the windows and rested his hands loosely against the cool railing beneath the glass. Earth floated below, enormous and calm, its swirling clouds drifting slowly across blue oceans that covered most of the visible hemisphere. He had spent years flying above that planet in a cramped cockpit barely large enough to stretch his legs. Seeing it now from the window of an alien vessel made everything feel distant and oddly fragile. A soft sound behind him interrupted his thoughts. Daniel turned to see Princess Lyra Valeth stepping into the corridor. She wore a different robe today, one woven from deep blue fabric that shimmered faintly whenever she moved beneath the lights. 2 advisors followed several steps behind her but stopped when she raised a single hand. She approached the window beside Daniel and looked out at the planet below without speaking for several seconds. Finally she said quietly, "Your world is beautiful." Daniel nodded slightly. "It is home." Lyra studied the oceans and clouds drifting across the surface of the planet. "When our fleet first arrived in your system, many of my advisors believed your civilization would resist until the end." Daniel folded his arms lightly across his chest. "Humans can be stubborn." Lyra glanced toward him. "And yet you agreed to end the conflict by giving yourself away." Daniel considered that phrasing for a moment before answering. "I do not see it that way." Lyra tilted her head slightly. "Explain." Daniel looked back toward Earth. "Where I come from, peace is worth a lot more than one pilot." The princess watched him carefully, searching his expression for sarcasm or regret. She found neither. The steady glow of the corridor lights reflected across her golden eyes while she considered his words. "Among my people," she said slowly, "alliances are formed through strength or advantage. Your decision does not follow that logic." Daniel smiled faintly. "That is because humans are not always logical." Lyra seemed to study that idea carefully. The enormous vessel continued its silent orbit around the planet while the stars beyond the windows drifted slowly across the darkness. After a moment she spoke again. "Tomorrow the ceremony will take place." Daniel nodded once. "I figured it was getting close." Lyra turned slightly so that she faced him directly now. For the first time since they met, there was a subtle change in her voice, something quieter and less formal than before. "When the ceremony is complete," she said, "you will become part of my world permanently." Daniel met her gaze calmly. "That was always the deal." Lyra held his eyes for several seconds as if weighing a question she had not expected to ask. Finally she spoke again, her voice almost thoughtful. "Tell me something honestly, Daniel Carter. He raised one eyebrow. All right. She hesitated only briefly before asking. If the treaty did not require it, would you still stay? For a moment the corridor fell completely silent except for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Daniel looked once more toward the glowing planet below, then back at the alien princess standing beside him in the soft corridor light. His answer came quietly. I guess we will find out. The day of the ceremony arrived without warning, as if the ship itself had quietly decided that history should move forward. Daniel Carter woke to the soft illumination of his quarters shifting from deep blue night tones to a calm golden light that resembled sunrise over the ocean. For several seconds he remained still on the sleeping platform, listening to the low steady hum of the Aurelian vessel moving through orbit nearly 200 miles above Earth. The sound had become familiar during the past few days, like the distant engine of a ship crossing an endless sea. Outside the wide observation window the planet turned slowly beneath him, its continents drifting through morning sunlight while thin rivers of cloud stretched across the atmosphere. Somewhere down there millions of people were beginning another ordinary day, unaware that a ceremony far above their sky might quietly change the future of their entire civilization. Daniel rose and walked toward the window, resting one hand against the cool transparent surface. From this height the oceans looked almost unreal, wide fields of blue light reflecting the distant sun. A gentle chime echoed through the room behind him. The door slid open and one of the Aurelian attendants stepped inside carrying a small metallic case. The tall figure bowed slightly. Daniel Carter of Earth, the attendant said in a calm voice translated through the ship's communication system. The preparation chamber awaits you. Daniel turned from the window and gave a small nod. I figured it was about that time. The attendant opened the case and revealed a set of ceremonial garments folded carefully within it. The fabric was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen before, woven from thin silver threads that reflected light like the surface of still water. These were designed according to the measurements recorded when you arrived, the attendant explained. They are appropriate for the union ceremony between the Aurelian royal house and the representative of Earth. Daniel lifted the garment from the case. It was lighter than it looked, smooth and cool against his hands. I hope I do not accidentally wear it backwards, he said with a quiet smile. The attendant paused for a moment before replying, the garment will adjust automatically. Within half an hour Daniel found himself standing inside one of the vast central halls of the vessel. The chamber stretched nearly 200 feet across, its curved ceiling glowing with soft white light that reflected from hundreds of small crystal structures embedded in the walls. Large observation windows lined one side of the hall, revealing the slow movement of Earth beneath the ship like a living painting drifting through space. Representatives from both civilizations had gathered throughout the chamber. Human diplomats stood together near the center of the hall wearing dark formal uniforms while several Aurelian officials waited along the outer edges of the room, their elegant robes shimmering softly beneath the lights. A wide pathway extended from the entrance of the chamber toward a raised circular platform at the far end of the hall. Daniel stood at the beginning of that path, adjusting the silver garment across his shoulders while he studied the quiet crowd gathered inside the enormous room. For a moment the entire chamber felt impossibly still. Then the doors at the opposite end of the hall opened slowly. Princess Lyra Valeth stepped inside surrounded by a faint halo of light from the corridor behind her. Her ceremonial attire was even more intricate than the robes she usually wore, layered with delicate patterns that shimmered like distant stars whenever she moved. The silver of her hair reflected the soft lighting across the chamber as she walked forward along the pathway toward the central platform. Daniel watched her approach while the quiet murmur of distant voices faded into silence. When she reached the center of the hall she paused only a few feet away from him. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The vast room remained completely silent while the planet below turned slowly through space beyond the windows. Finally Lyra looked directly into his eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but unmistakably sincere. Daniel Carter, she said softly, before this ceremony begins there is something I must say. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath as the alien princess continued, her golden eyes steady and thoughtful. This union was arranged to end a conflict between our worlds. But what happens after today, that decision will not belong to treaties or empires. She paused for only a moment before finishing the sentence that made several advisors quietly shift in surprise. It will belong to us. The silence inside the ceremonial hall seemed to stretch across the enormous chamber like a held breath. Daniel Carter stood on the polished platform while Princess Lyra Vailitha's words lingered in the air between them, echoing softly beneath the high silver arches of the Aurelian vessel. Beyond the towering observation windows the planet Earth continued its slow and quiet rotation, clouds drifting across oceans that glowed in distant sunlight nearly 200 miles below. For a moment no one moved. The representatives from both civilizations watched carefully, uncertain whether the princess had just followed tradition or quietly changed it. Daniel looked at her with a calm expression that had not changed since the ceremony began. "That sounds fair to me," he said simply. A faint murmur moved through the crowd gathered around the chamber, but Lyra did not look away from him. The soft glow from the crystal structures embedded in the walls reflected across her silver hair while she studied the human standing before her. In Aurelian culture the union ceremony was rarely questioned once it began. Alliances were usually matters of law, duty, and political strategy. Yet standing here in the quiet light of the chamber, she realized that the man before her did not behave like a political symbol at all. He behaved like a person who had made a choice. Lyra raised one hand slowly. The gesture caused a circular field of light to appear around the platform beneath their feet, a delicate ring of golden energy that shimmered like the surface of calm water. The ceremony had officially begun. One of the Aurelian advisors stepped forward and spoke in a clear formal voice that carried across the chamber through the ship's translation system. Before witnesses from both civilizations, this union will represent peace between the world of Earth and the empire of Aurelian. Daniel glanced briefly toward the wide windows where the blue planet filled half the sky. Then he returned his attention to Lyra. The advisor continued speaking, describing the treaty that would end the long years of tension between the two worlds. But Daniel noticed something unusual while the speech continued. Lyra's attention was no longer on the advisor or the gathered officials. She was still looking directly at him. Finally the advisor finished the final line of the formal declaration. The golden ring of light surrounding the platform grew brighter for a moment before fading back to a soft glow. Lyra stepped one pace closer to Daniel. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, but the translation system carried every word clearly throughout the chamber. "Daniel Carter of Earth," she said gently, "you agreed to stand here so that two civilizations could choose peace." Daniel gave a small nod. "That was the plan." Lyra's expression softened slightly, something warmer than the calm authority she usually carried. "Then allow me to speak not as a ruler," she continued, "but simply as Lyra." The chamber remained silent while the alien princess finished her sentence. "You are free to return to your world if you wish." Several of the Aurelian advisors exchanged surprised glances, and even the human diplomats seemed momentarily confused. The treaty required the union to remain permanent in order to guarantee peace. Yet Lyra's voice remained steady. "The agreement between our civilizations will stand regardless of your decision," she said. Daniel blinked once in quiet surprise. For several seconds he did not speak. Instead he turned slowly toward the enormous window behind the platform where Earth shone brilliantly in the darkness of space. The oceans and continents looked small from this height, yet they still carried the weight of every memory he had ever known. Finally, he looked back at Lyra. A faint smile appeared on his face, the same calm expression he had carried since the beginning of this strange journey. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I spent most of my life flying across that planet down there." Lyra waited quietly. Daniel continued. "But lately I have been thinking about exploring somewhere new." A soft ripple of quiet laughter moved through a few of the human diplomats as the meaning of his answer became clear. Lyra studied his face carefully, making certain she had understood correctly. "Then you choose to remain?" Daniel nodded once. "I do. For the first time since the ceremony began, Lyra allowed a small genuine smile to appear. The golden ring of light around the platform brightened again, reflecting across the polished floor while the enormous ship continued its silent orbit above the living world below. And far